ngadep ke の最軽量兵器 M72 携行式対戦車ロケットランチャー。皆さんこんにちは。今回はウクライナに供与された重量わずか 2.5kg の最軽量兵器 M72 携行式対戦車ロケットランチャーについて解説します。M72 携行式対戦車ロケットランチャーの一番の特徴は、重量がわずか 2.5kg であることに尽きるでしょう。小銃や機関銃よりも軽量の携行式対戦車兵器は、
We begin at the end of World War II. Among the victors, the USSR and the United States are now the two world superpowers. Europe is devastated. The east of the old continent is under the influence of the Soviet Union. In February 1948, Czechoslovakia, which is a parliamentary democracy, suffers a coup d'état orchestrated
네, 북한 도발에 이태원 참사에 미국 금리 인상까지 뉴스가 많은 날입니다.
목요일 아침 특집 뉴스광장 시작합니다.
미국 연방준비제도가 예상했던 대로 기준금리를 또 0.75%포인트 인상했습니다. 4회 연속 이른바 자이언트 스텝을 밟은 겁니다.
이로써 미국 금리는 15년 만에 최고 수준으로 올라갔고 우리와의 금리 차도 이제 1%포인트까지 벌어졌습니다.
네, 뉴욕을 연결해 자세한 소식 들어보겠습니다. 한부경 특파원, 연준이 아주 공격적으로 기준금리를 올리고 있는데 미국 금리가 이제 4%까지 올라간 거죠?
네, 말씀하신 대로 미국 기준금리가 3.75%에서 4% 구간으로 인상이 됐습니다. 2008년 1월 이후 15년 만에 최고 수준입니다. 40년 만에 최고 속도로 치솟고 있는 물가를 잡기 위해 연준이 전례를 찾아보기 힘든 아주 급격한 속도로 금리를 올리고 있습니다. 지난 3월 0.25%포인트 인상을 시작으로 미국 금리는 7개월 만에 제로금리에서 4%까지 올라가게 됐습니다. 금리를 한 번에 0.75%포인트 인상하는 자이언트 스텝을 4연속 밟는 초광수도 두고 있습니다. 이렇게 해서 우리나라 미국의 기준금리 차는 1%포인트로 더 벌어지게 됐는데 한국은행도 이달 열릴 금융통화위원회에서 금리 추가 인상이 불가피해 보입니다.
오늘 0.75%포인트 인상은 사실 예상이 됐던 부분이었죠. 다음 달에 또 얼마나 올릴지가 관심 아니겠습니까?
맞습니다. 올해 연준의 통화정책회의가 다음 달 한 번 더 남았는데 연준이 다음 달에 과연 금리 인상폭을 좀 줄일지 어떨지가 관심이었죠. 이 부분은 확실하게 힌트를 줬습니다. 연준은 금리 결정 성명문에서 앞으로 금리 인상폭을 결정할 때는 누적된 긴축의 효과, 그리고 통화정책이 경제와 금융시장에 미칠 영향, 그리고 영향이 나타나는 데 걸리는 시차를 종합적으로 고려하겠다고 했습니다. 앞으로 나타날 긴축 효과를 좀 봐가면서 인상폭을 결정하겠다는 의미로 읽힙니다. 파월 연준 의장도 기자회견에서 금리 인상 속도를 늦출 시기는 이르면 다음 회의가 될 수 있다고도 했습니다. 연준이 지난 9월 회의 때 제시한 올해 말 기준금리 수준이 4.4%입니다. 그러니까 다음 달 회의에서 0.5%포인트 인상할 거란 단순 계산은 이미 나와 있는 상태이기도 합니다. 저런 파월 연준 의장 얘기 들어보시죠.
So that time is coming, and it may come as soon as the next meeting or the one after that. No decision has been made. It is likely we'll have a discussion about this at the next meeting, a discussion.
네, 다음 회의에서 논의해보겠다. 인상폭은 좀 조절하겠다는 건데 다음 달에도 여전히 큰 폭의 금리 인상은 이어진다는 그런 의미 아니겠습니까? 금리 인상을 언제쯤 중단할지에 대해서는 어떤 전망이 나오고 있습니까?
그 부분 관련해서 파월 의장은 지금은 금리 인상 중단 시기를 논할 시기도 아니고 논의도 전혀 이루어지지 않고 있다고 몹시를 박았습니다. 그리고 더 나아가서 이번 금리 인상 사이클에서 최종 금리는 예상했던 것보다 더 올라갈 거라고도 했습니다. 결국 이 부분이 오늘 연준 발표의 핵심으로 해석이 되고 있습니다. 연준은 지난 9월에 내년 말 기준금리 수준을 4.6%로 제시를 했었는데 내년에도 긴축효가 안 나타나고 물가 안 잡히면 금리 더 올릴 수도 있다는 뜻입니다. 5%까지 갈 수도 있다는 전망이 나오고 있습니다. 오늘 회의에서 연준이 금리 인상 속도 조절 메시지를 내놓게 되면 이게 자칫 연준의 물가 안정 의지가 약해졌다 이런 신호로 읽혀질 수 있다는 우려가 일각에서 제기가 됐었는데 이 부분을 감안한 언급으로 해석이 되고 있습니다. 물가 잡겠다는 의지는 여전히 강력하고 어떻게 해서든 잡겠다는 거죠. 파월 의장은 아직 갈 길이 멀다고도 했습니다. 인상 속도는 중요하지 않다며 이 높은 금리를 얼마나 더 오래 유지할지가 더욱 중요한 문제가 됐다고 했습니다. 들어보시죠.
The question of when to moderate the pace of increases is now much less important than the question of how high to raise rates and how long to keep monetary policy.
네, 금융시장의 반응은 어땠습니까? 뉴욕 증시 마감했죠.
시장 참가자들은 연준이 속도 조절을 시사했다는 것보다 파월 의장의 이 같은 이른바 강경 매파 발언에 더 집중을 했습니다. 다음 달에 0.5%포인트로 금리 인상폭 조금 완화하는 게 문제가 아니라는 거죠. 최종금리 수준이 예상보다 높아질 것이라는 파월 의장 발언이 나오면서 뉴욕 증시 주요 지수는 일제히 급락세로 돌아섰습니다. 결국 다우지수는 1.55%, 스탠다드 앤 푸어스 500 지수는 2.5%, 나스닥 지수는 3.4% 하락 마감했습니다. 지금까지 뉴욕에서 전해드렸습니다.
개와 늑대의 시간, 다가오는 짐승의 그림자가 내가 기르던 개인지 나를 해치려는 늑대인지 좀처럼 분간하기 어려운 어슴푸레한 새벽 같은 시간을 뜻하는 말인데요. 내일 새벽 미국 중앙은행 연준의 금리 인상이 결정됩니다. 파월 의장이 또 한 번 매의 면모를 드러낼지 아니면 비둘기 같은 유화적인 메시지를 낼지 투자자들 잔뜩 긴장하고 있습니다. 자, 이 긴장을 풀어주실 분 이선엽 신한투자증권 부장 모셨습니다. 부장님 어서 오십시오.
네, 안녕하십니까?
네. 자, 올해는 정말 연초부터 연말이 다 될까지 파월의 입만 바라보는 그런 시장인
그렇습니다.
것 같습니다.
예.
내일은 우리가 매를 보게 될까요? 비둘기를 보게 될까요? 어떻게 전망해야 될까요?
매와 비둘기를 결합한 매둘기를 보게 될 것 같습니다.
새로운 조류의
네.
탄생입니까?
연준의 입장에서는 너무 매파적인 성향을, 즉 긴축을 강화했을 경우에는 금융시장 불안이 커질 수 있고 그렇다고 또 완화적으로 가게 되면은 물가를 잡을 수 없다라는 얘기들이 나올 수 있기 때문에
네.
이를 전충할 발언이 나올 것으로 현재 시장은 전망하고 있습니다.
아마 투자자들 중에 내일 0.75%포인트 인상할 거다. 이거 모르는 분은 없으실 것
네.
같고 이 기자회견에서 과연 파월이 어떤 말을 할 것이냐. 그게 내일 가장 중요한 관심사잖아요. 어떤 말이 나올까요?
전체적으로 향후 전망에 대해서 이제 얘기를 할 거라고 보여지지만 생각보다 많은 힌트를 주지는 않을 가능성이 높습니다. 왜냐하면 이번 같은 경우는 물가라든가 또는 고용과 관련 지표를 많이 못 봤기 때문에 결정이 쉽지 않을 거로 보고 있고요.
네.
다만 시장에서는 기대하기를 향후 정책 경로와 관련해서는 원래 당초 0.75%, 12월에도 0.75% 예상을 했는데
예.
시장에서는 이번에 0.75, 12월에는 0.5, 그다음에 0.25, 다시 한 번 더 0.25하는
네.
속도 조절에 나설 가능성에 무게를 두고 있습니다.
결국 뭐 최종 그 금리 인상 그 기조 그러니까 최종 그 금리 인상되는 수치는 뭐 똑같다는 얘기인데 그 일종의 뭐 조삼모사 아닙니까?
맞습니다.
나눠서 한다는
예.
건?
뭐 결론 종착지는 같지만 기본적으로 속도 조절했다는 얘기가 되겠죠. 그런데 이처럼 속도 조절을 연준이 할 수밖에 없는 이유는 그만큼 미국 국채 시장이 불안해지고 이에 따른 금융 위기 가능성이 굉장히 커져 있기 때문입니다.
지난주에 우리가 혹시 좀 몰랐던 게 있었다는 그런 말씀을 많이 하시던데요.
네,
그다음에
그렇습니다.
우리가 놓치고 있었던 게 뭐예요?
전체적으로 미국의 국채 시장에서 생각보다 큰 위기 가능성이 높아졌었고요. 이에 따라서 국채 시장의 혼란,
네.
이로 인해서 뭐 생각보다 미국이라든가 일본이 큰 위기로 갈 수 있었던 그런 상황에 직면해 있었습니다.
미국 국채 시장을 그렇게 흔들어 놨던 게 뭡니까 대체?
기본적으로 이제 일본이 가지고 있었던 미국 국채를 팔면서 전반적으로 엔화를 방어하려는 노력들이 이렇게 됐는데요.
네.
일본 같은 경우는 아시다시피 전 세계에서 1조 2천억 달러에 달하는 미국채를 제일 많이 보유한 국가입니다. 그런데 이렇게 일본이 87조 원이나 달하는
네.
국채를 이렇게 쏟아부으면서 전체적으로 이제 엔화 방어에 나서는 부분들.
예.
아무래도 이렇게 되게 되면 미국에서는 국채 시장의 물량이 많이 늘어나고 그렇게 되면 미국의 국채 가격은 빠지면서 국채 수익률, 즉 금리가 올라가지 않습니까? 금리가 급격하게 올라가게 되면 급격하게 올라간 금리만큼
네.
시장에서는 금융 불안이 커질 수밖에 없는 거고 이에 따른 영향들이 시장에 있었다고 보시면 되겠습니다.
그러니까 정리를 해보면 일본이 엔저를 방어하기 위해서 미국 국채 달러로 갖고 있으니까 그거를
그렇습니다.
일단 팔았다.
팔고
근데
엔화를 사는 거죠.
그렇죠. 근데 그 엔저가 온 이유가 미국의 금리 인상되면서 달러가 강해지면서 엔저가 온 거잖아요.
기본적으로는 미국의 금리 인상 속도가 너무 빨랐기 때문에
네.
일본 경제가 어려워진 거라고 보시면 되겠습니다.
결국 이제 위기의 단초가 미국과 일본의 금리 격차가 너무 빨리 벌어진 것. 거기서부터 시작이 된 건데 그러면
그렇습니다.
해법은 오히려 간단하지 않습니까? 미국이 속도 조절을 하든지 금리 인상에 있어서 아니면 일본이 금리를 올리든지. 근데 일본은 왜 금리를 올리지 않고 계속 제로 금리를 유지하는 건가요?
일본 같은 경우 다른 속내가 있다고 보시면 될 것 같은데요. 일본 같은 경우는 GDP의 260%가 달할 정도로 국가 부채가 많습니다. 우리나라 또는 일경이
올해 한미 안보협의회의 공동성명에는 김정은 정권 종말이라는 문구가 처음으로 담겼습니다. 북한의 강력한 반발이 예상되는데 다음 주 미국 중간선거를 전후한 7차 핵실험 가능성도 계속 제기됩니다. 홍진아 기자가 보도합니다.
мобилизованных граждан. Мы смогли помочь более...
Пытаемся привить им правильные ценности. Вот.
Сейчас, конечно, тех, кто проживает в Херсоне, нужно убрать из зоны и более опасных действий боевых, потому что гражданское население не должно страдать от обстрелов, от каких-то наступательных, там, контрнаступательных и прочих мероприятий, связанных с военными действиями.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.
We begin today with an escalation of the dispute between the US and Saudi Arabia over oil production. Saudi Arabia's energy minister has blasted.
Shifting focus, our next story is about the oil wars, the ongoing spat over oil production, a spat between the US and Saudi Arabia.
A warning from Saudi Arabia's energy minister appeared aimed at U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday. Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman accused countries of using their emergency oil reserves to, quote, manipulate energy prices rather than helping with shortages of supply. His remarks come after the Biden administration recently announced plans to sell an additional 15 million barrels from America's Strategic Petroleum Reserve by year's end, as it tries to curb high gasoline prices in the wake of production cuts from OPEC.
People are depleting their emergency stocks, had depleted it, used it as a mechanism to manipulate markets, while it is profound purpose was to mitigate.
It has been underway for quite some time, and from the looks of it, it's only set to intensify. Here's why I say this. On Tuesday, Saudi Arabia's energy minister, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, issued scathing rebuke of the US, accusing it of manipulating the markets. He did not take any names, but did not leave much to guess either. Let me quote from his statement. People are depleting their emergency stocks and using it as a mechanism to manipulate markets, while its profound purpose was to mitigate shortage of supply. However, it is my profound duty to make it clear to the world that losing emergency stock may become painful in the months to come. What exactly was he referring to? Joe Biden's decision to release strategic fuel reserves. 7 days back, he announced the release of an additional 15 million barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Reserve. 15 million.
Joining me right now is Arkansas Congressman and Financial Services Committee member French Hill. Congressman, what's your reaction to this? I mean, when did it become, that OPEC owed Joe Biden anything? I don't understand this whole notion that the U.S. is supposed to be mad at Saudi now. We got to reassess the relationship because they cut oil production.
Well, good morning, Maria. Yeah, this is just more pre-election talking points from the White House. The reason that we should be focused on energy is producing energy here at home. Right. And no one's been a bigger impediment to that than Joe Biden. So the issue rests with the Biden administration's war on energy through ESG, through taxes, through their attack on regulatory policies. That's what we need to get fixed, because that's driving inflation in this country.
Well, that's one of the most important issues, the energy policy. Will the Republicans be able to do anything about it should you take the House majority?
If we take the House and the Senate, we'll use our authority under the Congressional Review Act to reverse bad regulatory decisions by the administration. We'll put pressure on the administration's appointees in both the House and Senate to change this policy. Look, we were producing 13 million barrels a day before the pandemic. We were the largest producer in the world. We were exporting LNG, which Europe desperately needs now. And Biden turned the spigot off and turned all the incentives off. In fact, he did the opposite. He said he had a war on fossil fuels, and he delivered on it. So we will be pushing back and using all of our tools to make sure that the administration goes back to making us the world's largest energy producer, and we need an all-of-the-above energy policy, and that's something that this administration has also not been good on.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the policies, but it's also the fact that they won't acknowledge it and they try to blame everybody else. James Freeman, you're out with your piece this week, Bernie Sanders and the inflation blame game. I love the way that you write that now he's blaming the Mars family because candy prices are up. So it's the beef companies, it's the oil companies, now
turkey
it's the candy companies.
Yeah,
Big meat. I just call it big meat.
Big meat, big oil,
Big
little
candy.
gas, people who run gas
Big
stations. Now you got commercial real estate because rents are going up. So you have to believe there's this kind of epidemic of greed in the economy during the Biden era, or maybe it's inflation. But Congressman, I want to ask you, you talked about how these threats from the White House are kind of pre-election posturing from Biden. What's kind of amazing to me is how they're not even pretending that it's anything else. They're basically saying to Saudi Arabia, you didn't pump the oil to give us cheap gas before our election, so now we're going to reassess our strategic relationship.
Well, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, they're not saying that anything changed in the Middle East. They're not saying that geopolitics around the world, it's just purely a political payback. It's kind of amazing they didn't bother to spin it, isn't it?
And when did it become that the Saudis had the Biden?
ခွင့်တွေလည်းအပြည့်ရှိကြပါတယ်။ဥပမာ American သမ္မတအိုဘားမားရဲ့ဇနီးဖြစ်သူ Michelle Obama လိုမျိုးပေါ့။ဒါပေမဲ့မြောက်ကိုရီးယားနိုင်ငံခေါင်းဆောင် Kim Jong Un ရဲ့ဇနီးဖြစ်သူကတော့အဲ့လိုမဟုတ်ပါဘူး။သူမဘဝကိုလည်း
So after the first
ဩဇာလည်းရှိကြပြီးတော့ပိုင်ခွင့်တွေလည်းအပြည့်ရှိကြပါတယ်။ဥပမာ American သမ္မတအိုဘားမားရဲ့ဇနီးဖြစ်သူ Michelle Obama လိုမျိုးပေါ့။ဒါပေမဲ့မြောက်ကိုရီးယားနိုင်ငံခေါင်းဆောင် Kim Jong Un ရဲ့ဇနီးဖြစ်သူကတော့အဲ့လိုမဟုတ်ပါဘူး။သူမဘဝကိုလည်းလုံးဝလျှို့ဝှက်ထားပြီးတော့သူမလိုက်နိုင်ရမယ့်စီကံတွေကလည်းတင်းကျပ်လွန်ပါတယ်။ကဲဒါဆိုဘလို့စီကံတွေဖြစ်မလဲဆိုတာကြည့်ကြရအောင်။နံပါတ်1ကတော့အတင်းစီစဉ်ထားတဲ့သူတို့ရဲ့မင်္ဂလာပွဲ2008ခုနှစ်မှာ Kim Jong Un ရဲ့အဖေနေမကောင်းဖြစ်တဲ့ချိန်မှာသူ့အနေနဲ့အသက်ရှင်ခွင့်အချိန်သိမရတာကြောင့် Kim Jong Un ကိုလူဆိုးချူနဲ့လက်ထပ်ထိန်းများဖို့အမိန့်ပေးခဲ့ပါတယ်။အာနာရှင်ကြီးရဲ့တောင်းဆိုမှုကိုမလိုက်နာလို့လည်းမရပြန်ပါဘူး။ဒါကြောင့်မို့လို့လူဆိုးချူကလည်းရွေးချယ်ပိုင်ခွင့်မရှိဘဲ2009ခုနှစ်မှာ Kim Jong Un နဲ့လက်ထပ်ခဲ့ရပါတယ်။တနည်းအားဖြင့်ပြောရမယ်ဆိုရင်တော့လူဆိုးချူအနေနဲ့ပထမဦးဆုံးလိုက်နာခဲ့ရတဲ့စီကံကတော့ Kim Jong Un ကိုလက်ထပ်ဖို့ပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်။
half, counting third quarter. U.S. GDP is now 0.4%. Joining us now, Congressman Dan Mueser from House Foreign Affairs and Congressman Pat Fallon from House Oversight. First to you, Congressman Fallon. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
Long way since the days of Big Dog.
Our capabilities.
But I will show you some of my moves.
To make it look and feel.
Schumer caught on a hot mic. In a moment, we're going to show it. He was talking to the president about the Pennsylvania Senate debate between Dr. Oz and John Fetterman. Let's take a listen. Watch.
We're in danger of this. The debate didn't hurt us as much in Pennsylvania as it today, so that's good.
So, Congressman Fallon, first your reaction. Senator Schumer saying they're in danger of losing the Senate seat and the race in Pennsylvania. What do you think?
Well, Liz, that's the first time I've ever agreed with something that Chuck Schumer said. He was being honest. Anybody that watched that debate knows that Fetterman is completely incapable of serving. I feel for the guy from a health standpoint, but he's in no position to be a United States Senator. It was the worst debate performance I have ever seen. And I was a nerdy political kid when I was 10 years old. So I've been watching this stuff for 40 years, Liz. I've never seen anything like it.
You're dating yourself. I'm just teasing. You should be allowed to date whoever you want. That's an old Dick Cavett joke. Congressman Musser, so again, breaking news. Senator Chuck Schumer caught on a hot mic warning the president they could lose this Democrat Senate race with John Fetterman in Pennsylvania. When you heard that, what was your thought?
Well, once again, here's Schumer actually telling the truth, and they're terrified of the people knowing the truth. So you'll only hear that behind what they thought was behind the scenes. But, you know, there's a reason that they like Fetterman. One, they think they can get their vote. But let's face it, Fetterman makes Schumer look like John F. Kennedy. So their standards aren't very high. And, you know, the more we know about John Fetterman, and it's really coming out, the less chance he has. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is not going to, the majority of us are not going to vote this guy in.
Yeah.
Dr. Oz is on a roll.
So it's crime and inflation and gas prices could tip the Senate. Senate now in toss-up, according to 538. Let's move on to this. Congressman Fallon, your reaction when you heard the New York Times reporting the president, the White House, Democrats now furious. Saudi Arabia broke off their secret deal to get OPEC Plus to pump more oil and keep gas low to keep Democrats in power. The deal was to pump 400,000 barrels a day September, 200,000 barrels a day from October through December. Instead, OPEC Plus cut production by 2 million barrels a day. What do you think of this?
Well, Liz, it's another example of Joe Biden's White House putting politics over people. I mean, this is, as you mentioned in your monologue, this could be illegal interference. To sit there and say, you know, my political concerns are greater than the American people's need, particularly 2 weeks before an election they're about to lose.
So what statutory grounds do the Republicans have to say this is illegal election interference, Congressman Musser and Fallon? Do you guys know yet, or do you have that yet, or no?
Well,
Congressman Musser.
Yeah. Well, it certainly doesn't smell well, and it has a manipulation to it. The Saudis are stating just that it needed to be done before the election, so immediately.
Okay.
And special forces in the world in 2022. 10. Gruppo di Intervento Special, Italy. The Gruppo di Intervento Speciale is the special forces of the Italian military. These soldiers have responsibility for both military and civil operations. The unit is famous for its work in the fields of counterterrorism and VIP, executive, and dignitary protection. It has participated in many wars, including those in the Balkans, Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, etc. Nine. Alpha Group, Russia. The official name of the Alpha Group Special Force from Russia is Directorate A of the FSB Special Purpose Center. The Alpha Special Force is a group of professionals dedicated to keeping the peace. They prevent and respond to terrorist attacks in public transportation, buildings, and other areas. As of 2018, 9 Alpha members have been awarded the title Hero of the Russian Federation. The unit has already performed
And here, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh, so it has a very, very fishy smell to it. But the thing is, look, we all know what was being done there. They're going to the Saudis begging, yet we won't increase domestic energy. I mean, it's just such a gas backwards approach on every front.
So, Congressman Fallon, I mean, it's a double whammy to U.S. national security. The president is draining the U.S. strategic reserves. We have less than a 25-day supply of diesel in those reserves. It could be a shortage for truckers as we approach the holiday season, and he's damaging Saudi Arabia relations. So that's what the word is out there in foreign policy land. I mean, watch the president's top economic advisor, Brian Deese. Watch this again. He's trying to avoid answering questions about this secret deal. Watch this.
Brian, you didn't answer the question, so I'm going to ask it again. Brian, again, it's a really straight question. Did you ask the Saudis to delay that decision for a month? Are they telling the truth or not?
Look, I'm not going to get on air and disclose private conversations that members of our administration
the Saudis have shared it with us. You've got the opportunity to say it's true or not. Is it true or not?
What I will say clearly is that the communications that we've had with OPEC members and continuing have been based on our assessment of the economic circumstances of supply and demand in global oil markets.
Congressman Fallon, sit tight, because it's more than that. The White House, the Biden White House, Democrats are outraged about what happened. Let's listen to them threatening retaliation. Sit tight and listen to this. Watch.
Look, the Saudi planes could not fly, literally, their Air Force, without American technicians. Their Air Force would be grounded to a halt. They can't rely on China and Russia. It would take them almost a decade. They've been dependent on our military for decades. So it would force them to reconsider.
Politicians Blumenthal and Khanna right now, they're calling for a stopping of U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Do you support that legislation?
We're going to react to Saudi Arabia.
Was there an understanding, Karine, with the Saudis that the Saudis then backed away from?
Again, the trip was not about oil. That is not what we went to do there.
Unfortunately for the press secretary, yes, it was about oil. So the president is threatening retaliation because Saudi Arabia violated their secret deal. This is where we are at in geopolitics and our foreign policy, Congressman Fallon.
Well, it reminds me of what my mom used to say about what a tangled web we weave. They're not being honest, and they're not being forthcoming. You know, my good friend Dan Muser knows that, Liz, you mentioned the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It was at 695 million barrels at its height under President Trump, and it's under 400 million now. I mean, that's approaching like a 45% reduction. And, you know, like Dan said as well, we should be unleashing American energy, the American energy sector, not relying on Saudi Arabia.
That
and
would
to
keep
make
the
this
U.S.
kind of
safe. U.S. safe and employed. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
So, Congressman Fallon, go ahead, finish your thought.
Yes. It was just about a quid pro quo, and that's something that doesn't pass the smell test at all.
So, retaliation for violating a secret deal, Congressman Muser, your final word. I mean, gas is above the national average in nearly 20 states, about 30 vulnerable House Democrats there. So, retaliation for violating a secret backroom deal?
No, I think it's ridiculous. Why don't they retaliate against Joe Biden for cutting back 2 million barrels a day, which he's done since President Trump was in office? So they want to retaliate against the Saudis. It's a knee-jerk reaction to the liberal policies that are backfiring. And you know what? The Saudis also have a lot of concerns over this Iranian deal that the administration is trying to pursue.
Got it. Congressman Muser and Fallon, thanks for joining us tonight, gentlemen. It's good to see you both.
And literally nobody on the planet better than Mr. Charlie Hurt, Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor, and Ms. Katie Pavlich, editor at townhall.com and Fox News contributor. So I've given you more numbers than any human being deserves. I apologize, but sometimes facts matter once in a while. And I just kind of, I've had a sinus infection. I just thought I'd go and drive it all crazy in delirium and give you all the facts. But Katie, let me begin with you. I'm very interested in the impact on the election, which is in a couple of weeks, of this inflation number and the inflation situation in general. What you thinking?
Well, we've seen for months that inflation is the #1 priority when it comes to what voters are going to head to the polls and cast their ballot for. You've seen in a number of debates that Democrats are at least willing to have. The one in Ohio this week between Tim Ryan, Democrat running for the U.S. Senate seat, and J.D. Vance. He tries to claim that he's stood up to the party line, the big government socialist spending from Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, and yet he's voted with them 100% of the time, which J.D. Vance took the opportunity to point out. Today is the 1-year anniversary of White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain saying on Twitter that inflation is a high-class problem, downplaying it for the rest of the country when American families are paying 30% more for their utility bills, and it's not even winter yet. So when it comes to all the stats and data and facts that you laid out so eloquently, Larry, those are so important, but people are feeling those things at home every single time they go to feed their children, every time they fill up their gas tank to go to work. And the only response from Democrats, including President Joe Biden today, is that Republicans will somehow make it worse, while they also continue to tout that Republicans voted against the Inflation Reduction Act, which we know was really a celebration of inflation and by all accounts will make inflation worse. So the message from Republicans is that if you vote for them, they will try to rein in the spending from a one-party town in Washington, and therefore hopefully prices will go down as a result for American families who are hurting at every single level.
Yeah, we'll look at, Charlie, first of all, Katie's right. It's the kitchen table stuff that really matters. People know instinctively. I just did all those numbers to show you I could do it. I used to do that for a living many years ago when I worked on Wall Street and occasionally in the government. So I just thought I'd have some fun. But Charlie Hurt, this inflation disease, I think, is more virulent in more ways, particularly in terms of lower living standards. People do know how hard it is to make household budgets, which is what Katie was inferring. They do know electricity prices are up. They do know that gas prices are up. I know they've come off some, but they're still a lot higher than they were a year or two ago. And they know that food and grocery prices are up. And they know that, the pocketbook doesn't stretch as far. And to me, that's going to be lethal on whatever it is, November 8th or November 9th. But is there a counter view here? I mean, what do Democrats think is going to happen? They're all whooping up for, standing up for joy at today's CPI report?
Yeah, well, unlike Joe Biden and Democrats in Washington, regular families, they can't even pretend to hide from these increases in inflation and gas prices. They can't, and of course, obviously, they also can't print money the way Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress are perfectly happy to do, which of course makes the problems even worse. Every single one of these problems that you outlined can be traced directly to the policies of Joe Biden and Democrats in Congress over just 2 years. And it's so obvious. And the only thing worse than these people absolutely wrecking the economy, ushering in higher inflation than we have seen in 40 years in a lot of people's lives, is to do that and then to pretend that you didn't, or to pretend that everything is great. And so when Joe Biden comes out today and talks about how inflation is at 2% or something like that, when it's at 8.2%, that kind of cavalier dismissal of those people that, as you point out, Katie, who have to fill up their gas tank or pay the grocery bill every week, and they cannot believe what they're having to pay to feed their families. They can't hide from that. And Democrats can't hide from that. And that's why what you're seeing today, if you look on other channels on cable television, they're talking about what? January 6th. That's how desperate they are.
Right.
They are dying to talk about that stuff because they can't talk about the economy.
Yeah.
It's killing them.
One thing in my under the hood mix of too many statistics, it really is more expensive to operate a car. I mean, that may sound mundane, but look, everybody owns a car. And nearly everybody owns a gasoline-fired car, combustion engine car. And Katie, you look through those numbers, the interest rates to buy a car up, car prices are up, used car prices are down, but the maintenance, the repair, and the insurance are all way up. So it's really expensive. So you have a problem with electricity prices, you have a problem with your refrigerator, you also have a problem with your automobile. And Americans eat food, need heat, and drive cars. The inflation report says 0 for 3. 0 for 3. give you the last word.
Well, on the issue of the cars, I mean, don't forget that that is intentional. This is an administration that has made very clear that they want all Americans driving electric vehicles, and if the cost of gas is too high, their response repeatedly has been, we'll go out and buy an electric car that you also can't afford. And by the way, let's not talk about the fact that the electricity you're going to have to put in that car is also going to be very expensive and unavailable, like in California, because the grid is overloaded as a result of these green policies. But if you look at, housing, for example, the big question is, where does this end? Because inflation is still out of control. You talked about the Fed. The Fed keeps raising interest rates. I was in Arizona 2 weekends ago on a 2-hour drive, and it reminded me a lot of the 2008 crisis because there's all these new developments that are halfway built. And there's hundreds of homes that people now cannot afford to buy. And so there's this looming issue that we had back in 2008, 2009, where these developers started trying to build all these new houses and nobody bought them. And they all went belly up, and it was a terrible, terrible time for places like Arizona and Nevada. So that's a freight train crashing right off of the tracks. And it's interesting to watch the White House and their political response to this and where they're taking their wins. For example, again, Ron Klain today, on the 1-year anniversary of saying inflation is a high-class problem, was touting the fact that the Social Security is now issuing the largest increase in cost of living adjustment, as if that's a victory, even though it's the largest since 1981 as a result of increased prices. So they're clearly losing on this, and they intentionally are making things more expensive for Americans, which I don't think they're going to like when they go to the polls.
By the way, mortgage rates, 30-year mortgage over 7%. On Ron Klain, it's a great point. By the way, on that logic, we ought to have 20% inflation. We want to have 40% inflation. You'll get a bigger cost of living adjustment.